Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. Today we are joined by Roya Hakakian to talk about a book called Journey from the Land of No, which on its cover has a very subtle reading line or subtitle, which intrigued me, A Girlhood Caught in Revolutionary Iran. Mm-hmm. So thank you for stopping by.
Delighted to be with you.
One of the people who really liked your book, or likes your book, is one Elizabeth Frank, the author of Louise Bogan, A Portrait. Ms. Frank writes, a stunning and courageous memoir of the Iranian Revolution. With a lyrical intensity matched by her sharp command of detail, Hakakian gives us an indelible portrait of a time and place rich in personality, humor, and tragedy, while offering at the same time a meditation on the unquenchable human desire for dignity and freedom. The part of that marvelous quote that I wanted to focus on here at the beginning of the program is this sense of your providing an indelible portrait of a time and a place. Mm-hmm. And I think you do. And I think that's important because I think so few of us know anything about Iran. Except hostages.
It's true because I have often been confused, even till these very recent times, with Iraqis. I say I'm from Iran, and people say, well, interchangeably use
your
the word Iraq.
Saddam.
And it's very ironic because for one thing, Iran has been at war with Iraq for 8 years in the 90s, and the two countries were arch enemies in that decade. Correct. And Iraqis are Arabs and Iranians are not, and Iraqis speak Arabic and Iranians speak Persian. So to answer your question, it's very hard to try to really give a sense of Iran to Western audiences.
But you do, and you do it right at the start. Mm-hmm. You begin the book, in a sense, with Jimmy Carter's description of Iran in December, I think, of 1977. He calls it an island of stability in one of the most troubled areas of the world.
True.
That's what he thinks it was in 77, and that was under the Shah.
Exactly.
And you write... this is also a place where individual and civil liberties lagged behind health and economic growth, where freedom of expression did not exist. Intelligence services hounded writers, intellectuals, and political activists and tortured them in prison.
Yes.
That's your view of Carter's placid landscape.
Yes. I think... in retrospect, Iran was ironically thriving economically in those years. And
I can remember a special section, or maybe a whole darn edition of Time magazine devoted to Iran under the Shah, with the palaces and all the colorful stuff that was going on.
Yes,
yeah, the manufacturing,
yes,
et cetera, the beautiful homes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the Shah had done was to raise the price of oil. I mean, he really was, for the first time, one of the first leaders among the region's leaders to propose to raise the price of oil at OPEC, which surprised all the Western countries. So Iran was doing quite well as far as the economic growth was concerned, and then. On the other hand, and you had development, urban development. You had, the look of Tehran was a very cosmopolitan look. And then when it came to civil liberties, you had, third world conditions, which meant that there was only one party that ruled the country, and that was the party that the Shah was the head of. And there were no freedom of speech or press. And I think
that if you will, ironclad rule, at least on looking at it from that perspective, ends with the arrival of the Ayatollah Khomeini in February of 1978. And 78? 79. And he seizes power, and it's the end of 2,500 years of monarchy.
Exactly.
This is a radical change.
It's staggering to think what the contemporary Iran has gone through within the last 25 years. I mean, a history, an ancient history of monarchy ended. What we all come to expect as the movement of history forward would have been for the monarchy to end and go into democracy, and it did not.
You know, the standard question, why did you write the book, is something we usually avoid here on Conversations on the Coast. But in the case of Journey from the Land of No, it really has a very interesting answer, and we'll get it when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Journey from the Land of No is the intriguing title. The author is Roya Hakakian, and the publisher, which I perhaps did not mention the first time around, is Crown Books. And we don't do that. They get mad. Mad for the book is one Sherwin B. Newland, author of How We Die and Lost in America. In language of breathtaking poetic beauty, he says, Roya Hakakian tells the enthralling story of a unique and tragic time in the history of the family and the ancient country she loves. And that's so true. There is so much love for Iran and so much love for your family in this book that it just shines through every page. We visit a place and a people we have until now only seen from a distorted distance, and we come to understand them through the eyes of a gifted young girl living through her own intellectual awakening. To read this bittersweet elegy to Iran is to witness the emergence of a major new talent. And I like what Sherwin says, even though he sounds like a lawyer. Sounds a very, very good thing for him to say. Now, it seems to me, if I remember correctly, that you left Iran somewhere around 1984.
Exactly.
And but you didn't start writing this book until about 2001?
Yes.
Were you wasting your time?
Look, when I always knew that I was going to be a writer, so it wasn't a question of whether I wanted to write or not. It was
you were compelled.
It was a question of whether I wanted to write a memoir. And one of the things that I had vowed to do was not to do fashionable American things, as everybody does. And one of those fashionable American things was, be self-indulgent and write a memoir. And I thought, I'm frankly not old enough to do that on one hand. So I exercised a great deal of self-restraint and didn't really go for the idea of doing this very faddish act of writing a memoir.
No, there was some deep things going on in your mind, which you put down beautifully in the book. To write about Iran in Persian would be daunting. Instead of re-examining the memories, I feared that in Persian I might begin to relive them. Persian could summon the teenager at sea. English sheltered the adult survivor safely inside a lighthouse. I did not know how to use the language of the censors to speak against them, to use the very language by which I had been denied so much as a Jew, a woman, a secular citizen, and a young poet. The love of Iran was still in my heart, yet I could not return. The irrevocable journey I had made was not the physical one out of Iran. It was the journey from no, hence the title of the book, from the perpetual denials, and what I had painstakingly arrived at, greater than even the new land, was a new language, the vessel of my flight to vast possibilities. That's a great tribute to English. We probably don't deserve that.
Absolutely.
That is... But, I mean...
I love this language. I think the English language is a glorious, glorious language. And, it's very freeing to be able to gain mastery of a language, because that enables you to gain a mastery over your space. And therefore, the disorientation that we as immigrants experience diminishes.
Yeah. So you're beginning, if we can think back to that time, to feel like maybe it is about time I sat down and started writing. But there's a wonderful story of what pushed you over the edge. You were working at 60 Minutes, and you were being badgered, and put that in quotation marks, by an editorial writer from the New York Times to be a source for all things Iranian that he had to write editorials about. And you felt, it's not really for me. And then 60 Minutes sent you to Georgia.
Yes. I love Jerry Cochran, who is an African American and former sailor in the U.S. Navy, who summoned me to his little church in Albany, Georgia, and I arrived, and Jerry, greeted me by saying, "I have waited 20 years for you to arrive," and. Imagine you're...
This'll shake you up, even if you're from 60 Minutes.
Absolutely. I mean, you travel all this way, you go from New York, and, and you just want to, spend a couple of days away, and all of a sudden this guy puts this huge responsibility upon your shoulders, and I practically sank into my chair, and Jerry started telling me about this disease that African-American sailors aboard a USS Enterprise had come down with, and the Navy was having a hard time admitting to the fact that it was an occupational disease that they had come down with. And he turned to me and he said, "Do you understand what it means to be bearing and having witnessed this? And do you understand that I am not going to rest until I've told this story?"
Yeah. Do you understand what it means to be bearing a story never told? And boy, did he say that to the right person. I have waited for years to hear you come and hear my story. So he had begun, and then that chapter ends, and so I began. Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to continue with this wonderful chat with Roya when we come back. And we'll talk a little bit about the revolution, as though it's the kind of thing that Roya can't help but being in the middle of. And we'll see why when we return.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Roya Hakakian is the guest. Journey from the Land of No is the book. And you're listening, of course, to Conversations on the Coast, and the book is published by Crown Publishers. And a pretty fair country critic by the name of Harold Bloom has just had a shot at the book and, in part, says this: Journey from the Land of No is an incredibly eloquent and passionate book. Its author, one may prophesy, is on the verge of a brilliant new career. The heck with 60 Minutes, huh? Are we done with 60 Minutes?
I hope not.
Should I let them know on the air? No.
I had
this station is a CBS station, ultimately, in this stack of, okay, so it's okay, 60 Minutes, she's not quitting.
Greeting, Mr. Les Moonves.
You went through this revolution where Khomeini comes in and things really improve. Mm-hmm. Improve for you as a woman, as a Jew, and so forth. And then there's it changes. One of the saddest moments in the book for me was the contrast that you write about in school after Khomeini comes in, and there's a stuttering girl classmate, and the way the school is being run now, after the change, everybody's very patient with her, and the teacher says, it's okay, we have time, there's no need to rush. And then a couple of weeks later, it seems, this poor woman gets thrown out of the job, the hardliners come in, and it all changes. Mm-hmm. It all changes. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are so many points in the book like that. I mean, your family life is beautiful, and you know, in the early chapter, everything's going along wonderful, and Albert, the cartoonist, has to leave the country because he's doing nasty things in that magazine, according to the authorities.
Right.
You're in the middle of it all the time.
And, going back to what we were discussing earlier, of course I didn't want to write a memoir because I thought, my God, too many odd things had happened for this to really be somewhat an example of an ordinary life. And I thought, the series of things that had happened one after another made for an exception to a life as opposed to a rule. And therefore I thought, why do a memoir? Who could possibly identify with this? Until I, we had 9/11, and I realized that the issues that were the issues of my childhood are becoming the issues of the world at large.
Gosh, they are. They are. I don't want to run out of time without sharing some more of the style and the poetry, if you will, of your writing. This is the chapter, I think it's called 1984.
Yes.
The penultimate chapter. And this is kind of toward the end. Among the ashes and the bonfire, my world was burning. My newspapers and magazines, my fifth grade appreciation certificate from the Shah's Minister of Education, underneath them, my weightier loves had settled. Albert's copy of The Little Black Fish, and this is the story, the children's story that your brother shared with you. My records and tapes, signed copies of my favorite poetry books, my Jane Austen reader, my hardcover Mikhail Sholokov's and Quiet Flows of the Dawn, my leather-bound Dostoevsky's, all burning to punish me for what should never have been a crime. And the crime was possessing them.
Yes.
And then you go on, I knelt before the heap, leaned into the fire to discover the first layer of kindling, my diary, my own book of poems, now only identifiable by their thick spines that had yet to burn. Father walked onto the balcony. He stood behind me, laid both hands on my shoulders, cleared his throat, and said faintly, "It's time we leave for America." That must have been hard for him.
Yes, my father was really a creature of Iran, and I mean that because everything that he ever was good at ended by leaving that country, or at least that's what he thought. He was recognized on the street whenever we walked. He was wonderfully articulate and a man who was known for his oral abilities, for his abilities. His
poetry. His kind of on-the-spot poetry. Having a wedding, your dad goes over, he has a glass of wine and does a poem.
Exactly.
And if you're having a circumcision, bring him in.
Yes,
He'll comfort the baby.
That's really who he was. And so when we came to this country, all of these things were stripped away from him.
Well, I can't believe that the time has slipped away from us, Roya. I've really enjoyed it. Don't forget, the book is called Journey from the Land of No. The author is Roya Hakakian. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.